Season 1 of the OA is unique in that it has two stories within it, the one taking place in the present and the one that the OA tells the Crestwood 5 over the course of the 8 episodes about how she was held captive by Hap. From the very beginning, we were told that this story isn't exactly what it seems, with the creators confirming in interviews that the actual scenes that play out are from the imaginations of the Crestwood 5. Today I'm going to discuss my theories for what really happened to Prairie leading up to the events of Season 1, which I believe we would have learned in Season 5 of the show. The creators have said that they intended the show to have 5 seasons and that each season would tell a similar story, with each season having the OA traveling to a new dimension. The story also appears to be both a loop and a palindrome, both allowing for Season 5 to return back to Dimension 1 where the story started. There is evidence for this even in the title of the show, with the O in the OA symbolizing the constant loop that she is trapped in, and the A symbolizing the way that the story mirrors itself, with the second half reflecting the first half. This is also foreshadowed by the violin theme of the OA, the one that Prairie plays in the subway, which if reversed still plays the exact same song, a musical palindrome. When we got to Dimension 2, we were led to believe that there were infinite dimensions, all of them being forking paths from the same original timeline, with Dimension 2 breaking off from OA's childhood and turning out differently. Dimension 3, however, has the OA jumping into the body of Britt Marling, someone who shares no history or lineage with the OA, who is entirely fictional in her world, as are the other characters in the show. The actors this season would be playing fictionalized versions of themselves in Dimension 3, and the impression we would get is that both timelines from Season 1 and 2 are just the imaginary creations of Britt Marling herself, and that she accidentally made the OA real through the power of belief, both hers and the audience who watches the show. Other characters like Steve would also have jumped into the bodies of their actors, as did Dimension 2 Michelle into their actor. This would be a devastating reveal to the characters who are essentially the creations of a godlike Britt Marling, but they'd accept their fate to play out the story and bring Hap to Dimension 4 to try and trap him there. While I intend to do a full video breaking down the possibilities of Dimension 4 next week, what we need to know for this video is that it likely would have ended with the Haptives being taken in a way that OA could not save them from. Her only hope to get them back would be to go to Dimension 1 again, to an earlier point in time, and start the cycle all over again. Whether through a reverse use of the movements or just willing herself to Dimension 1 like she threatened at the end of Season 2, I think this would send her to one of her previous NDE points, specifically the one where Hap hit her over the head at the end of Episode 3 in Season 1. This is the moment where Prairie started to remember her name as the OA, though it took a while for it to come to her, a sign that her Dimension 4 self had jumped to her but was having memories suppressed, which is common with interdimensional travel. But of course, Season 5 can't just be the same story that OA told in Season 1. In Season 2, when Kareem goes through the house on Nob Hill, he makes it to the very end, a dead end, and finds a quote from T.S. Eliot. "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." After this, Kareem can go back to where the water started rushing in at the beginning of the house's puzzles and find the proper entrance to the attic, not understanding he had the answer all along without solving the rest of the puzzle first. This quote was a clear sign that Prairie's story was not exactly what we were led to believe, and that the end of the show will be us returning to the beginning to see the truth of it, but that we would need to solve the other puzzles across the other seasons first to truly understand the beginning. Which is that the other Haptives, and perhaps even the evil aspects of Hap himself, are just Prairie's delusions, or even her alternate personalities. Before receiving the dove that I believe would turn Prairie into the OA, Prairie already had a lifetime of hearing voices that she believed were real people her father were using to send messages to her. These were suppressed by her meds, but they also numbed Prairie out. When she ran away from home, she would stop taking her meds, and thus the voices would have an opportunity to return. This was something Hap encouraged her to do before allowing her to live with him, writing off her issues as just vivid dreams without the meds. Prairie did touch this version of Hap, this seemingly nice Hap, so we do know some version of Hap is real that acts like this. And in fact, I think this is the most real depiction of Hap there is, with everything else we know about him being a combination of Prairie's delusions, and Hap unfortunately playing along at the wrong moments. I believe Hap was no mad scientist doing unethical experiments, but instead really did study NDE survivors with what little money and resources he could offer subjects, such as the ones he described to Prairie. He did not ask Prairie to come with him, but instead she offered herself up. I believe Hap saw a homeless woman looking for a kind man to help her, and he decided to take a risk and legitimately study her. He would take her home, she would begin to experience withdrawal from years of medication, and the voices would begin to return. It is not until Prairie is alone that the voices start to speak to her. None of the Haptives shouted or tried to get her attention like they had when they saw that someone was just even outside of Hap's home, such as the sheriff. Scott starts by blaming Prairie for how she ended up there, and Homer cuts him off, telling Prairie not to let her thoughts bring her down, as if Scott is just one of her thoughts with a mean voice. Homer then alludes to how Prairie will cope with her perceived situation, to escape in her dreams. Homer, Scott, and Rachel would be the names she projects onto the voices based off of what little she knows of Hap's other subjects that he described. Experiencing withdrawal from her meds, returning symptoms of her psychosis, and without being able to see, she would think that they are real people. The voices would rationalize that they would be Hap's other subjects, some of which Hap described to Prairie as why else would they be in this basement. The story they built up together would all be about Prairie rationalizing that these voices are real but that she cannot reach them. These voices would convince OA that they are trapped just like she is in rooms just like hers all next to each other, but she could never see them and she could never feel them to prove that they were real. Hap I believe to be a very science-minded man, and the scenes that depict him as obsessed with his work are likely very truthful. He has real food in his fridge, but likely eats the nuggets just to not worry about cooking or cleaning for the most part. His life is built around not having any time to interact with anyone, and he only forces himself to sleep so he can wake up refreshed for more work and research. He is already a hermit essentially, and not wanting to cross any boundaries with this blind homeless woman that he gave his spare room to, he wouldn't be sure how to actually help Prairie as she became more psychotic, let alone take her outside as much as she wants or needs for fresh air with all that he has to do. As Prairie starts to lose her sanity from her lack of medication, something Hap encouraged her not to take way back at the restaurant together, he would retreat even further, not sure how to deal with her going crazy, but also feeling the need to study her behavior as part of her experience surviving in NDE. He would start to realize that Prairie was hearing voices and that she thinks they are real people, and he would find reasons to play along. When she first makes sandwiches, for instance, he seems happy to let her eat, but she won't because the others can't. Hap allows her to make them sandwiches, but the way he words it is as if he knows they are imaginary. But he is just trying to encourage her, to play along, to let her have her little crazy moment so that she knows she is accepted in his home. Even the way he talks to the others is as if they aren't real, telling them that it wasn't going to be a regular thing, as if he is really telling Prairie he won't let her make food for her imaginary friends so often, and that they, or rather she, should probably appreciate it. At this point, he wouldn't know that she sees him as their captor, as opposed to them just being other people that live in the basement with her. So each time he thinks he's helping her by playing along with the fact that they exist, he's confirming her delusion that he has imprisoned them. And when a situation becomes dire, Hap realizes that the only way to get Prairie to act rationally is if she thinks she is doing it to keep the others safe, such as when he needs his EpiPen and he claims that they'd starve down there if he died. As Prairie would continue down her spiral, she would become the darkest version of the OA, the one willing to kill Hap by pushing him down the stairs if it means escaping. It is when she is willing to kill Hap that she ends up having her own NDE, which I believe to be Hap legitimately trying to rescue her when he hits her over the head at the cliff. It is here she would get the dove carrying the soul of Dimension 4's OA. Her memory will be a bit suppressed, but as time goes on, she seems to remember more and more, and the name the OA begins to come back to her. She would also get her eyesight back, and thus be able to see the others, but after months or perhaps years in the basement talking to the voices in her head, I think she was able to convince herself that they were really there and that she could see them. However, she still could not touch them because of the cage, and to try and touch them would shatter the illusion. She had made them real people in her head. The core of the show is the power of human thought to become reality. We were led to believe that there were infinite universes branching off from each other early on in the series, with Dimension 1 and 2 just being two among those infinite universes. But in Season 3, we would be led to believe that both these dimensions are just fantasy creations of Britt Marling, with Dimension 4 being yet another one. Finally, in Season 5, many fans expect a 5th dimension, perhaps one that just looks similar to Dimension 1, but a new one entirely. However, from here, the perspective of who really created the alternate universes is once again shifted, and it more resembles certain ideas in Jewish Kabbalah, with OA of course returning back to Dimension 1. In Jewish Kabbalah, there is said to be 4 dimensions, with there sometimes being a 5th dimension if you consider the source of these 4 dimensions, or all of them combined in a sense. There is only one dimension that is physical out of these 4, the dimension we live in, with the other 3 being sort of higher dimensions. The 3rd dimension among these 4, sometimes 5, is the dimension of creation, explaining why Dimension 3 in the show portrays the entire series as being Britt Marling's creation, when in fact it is really the OA's from Dimension 1. There was never an endless map of universes that they could get to with the movements, but rather, the movements were just tools created by the OA and willed into existence by the OA through the power of belief. This becomes important because in Dimension 1, with her friends being alternate personalities, we now see that they themselves were able to jump into the bodies of people that they were seemingly inspired by in Dimension 2, into their own bodies. However, even Dimension 2 just appears to be a fabrication of Prairie's as opposed to a legitimate split in a timeline, a non-physical higher world where things just worked out better for her because that's the way she imagined this world. And thus, all of her alternate personalities who believed themselves to be real people were able to jump into the bodies of real-life versions of themselves. With her memories repressed, the OA had to uncover the movements again, one by one through her alternate personalities. OA had the first movement, and thus Rachel, representing Dimension 1, only ever floats above her body during an NDE. Homer represents her memories from Dimension 2, Scott from Dimension 3, and I believe Hap on some level represents OA from Dimension 4. I think it is no coincidence that Renata came in just after Prairie ate the dove that made her the OA. Before that happened, Katoon told OA that the 5 of them would stop a great evil, and I believe that the 5th person that OA could not see was, at least in one of the many interpretations of this line, Hap, or at least the evil version of him that exists in OA's head, creating a full group of 5 people in her head before Renata even showed up. From Hap's perspective, however, OA would continue to go crazy, and Hap would continue to study her while trying to also help her. But OA would treat herself as only his patient, there against her will, because of her delusions. Delusions he had to sometimes play into, as discussed before. When OA would start to claim that she brought Scott back from the dead with 2 of the movements, I think Hap may have brought in the sheriff and his wife, using it as a test to see if her dance really could heal someone. She would perform the movements alone, thinking she was dancing with Homer, but even here the 2 weren't allowed to touch. Evelyn seemed to be healed, though we don't know if it would be anything more than momentary, as even she knew that she would be dying soon after. My rough estimation of what happened next is OA ended up having her body taken over by the evil aspect of Hap, stole the sheriff's gun, and shot him and his wife. The sheriff did not come there because he thought that Hap was hiding people in his bunker, but because Hap probably brought the sheriff there himself to try out OA's dance moves on Evelyn to see if it would heal her. From everyone's perspective, the movements had worked, but OA had crossed a line in murder and Hap couldn't take care of her anymore. All season long, we would have seen a charming and nice Hap slowly turn into the man that the OA imagined him to be in her head, with OA killing the sheriff being the final straw. Anything Hap had done to try and restrain OA in the last 7 years would have been seen as extremely justified, with this being the horrible outcome that he was trying to prevent all along. Hap thought he could take in a crazy homeless woman he met on the subway who thought she was just misunderstood and that he could make her love him, but instead she found a way to turn him into the villain in her head who only ever saw her as a test subject. In his last attempt to spare Prairie, I think he really did abandon her and still claimed to have all of her friends locked away, his last attempt at protecting himself from having police coming after him, not wanting OA to accidentally convince the cops that he had been imprisoning her in his basement for the last 7 years. The series would end with Prairie jumping off of the bridge, resetting the cycle, shattering herself so she can't remember who she truly is. She would then tell her story to the Crestwood 5, projecting backwards her delusions onto their minds, using them as inspiration for the hazy memories of the voices in her head, and even using videos she finds on the internet to create her version of Homer. In doing this, the OA would have also created Hap in several ways, turning the good man he was in Dimension 1 into the cruel man who had to abandon her, but also creating a fake version of him in her head that was able to travel to another dimension with those alternate personalities. The same way Britt seem to make imaginary characters jump into the bodies of real people who played them, Away, at the end of Season 1, jumps to a dimension she created where her imaginary alternate personalities can jump into the bodies of people who somewhat inspired them, including an evil Hap. The story of the OA takes a lot of inspirations, and the one most relevant here is the Gnostic story of Sophia. Gnosticism is a series of similar beliefs that interpret our existence as more of a prison than a paradise, as some other religions might claim it. The story of Sophia, whose name means wisdom, is the story of one of these sort of lower gods, if you will, created by the eternal perfect God that all things come from. Sophia was one of his divine creations. In an attempt to be like this true God, Sophia attempts to create the same way he did, but ends up accidentally making the physical universe instead, and with it, the figure known as the Demiurge. In Gnostic stories of Christianity, the Demiurge is God, Yahweh himself, rearranging the universe to his liking and creating humans with the light of Sophia, which he doesn't understand as being his creator. He wants the humans to worship him as the creator, not realizing that they are his creator in a sense, but that he has trapped shards of her in each individual human. This parallels the evil Hap and how he wants to understand the universe by exploiting more spiritually connected beings, and then receive glory for his findings. The Demiurge then represents the shadow of Sophia, the part of her that, at the height of her pride, tried to be like the first creator, and ended up falling into her own creation by accident, enslaved by the aspect of her that wanted a lower emanation to worship her to begin with. This isn't to say that the creators of the OA think that God, or the biblical God, is evil or ignorant. The 5 seasons paint the picture of OA being trapped by Hap, but in the end it is he who is trapped by her in Season 5. He is trying to make a life with her, help her understand herself and the universe, and is trapped by her crazy delusions as much as she is. In many ways, the story is about how life can be a paradise or a prison depending on how you view it, with perspective being important to all things, including how they view themselves as good and evil. Across the 5 dimensions, the OA and Hap appear to be going from one moral end of the compass to the other. In Season 1, OA presents herself as her most good, and Hap as his most evil. In Dimension 2, Nina is not evil in any way, but she is more indulgent in vice, as her bartender explained. Dr. Percy, meanwhile, was still evil, but perhaps not as heinous as Hap in Season 1's story. In Dimension 3, their counterparts Britt Marling and Jason Isaacs are wife and husband, leading me to believe that they would have been morally balanced with each other here, and Dimension 4 would thus show us a darker side of OA and a nicer side of Hap. This, of course, would bring us to the reality of Dimension 5, where Hap is his nicest and OA is her most evil, in a sense, with the opposite idea existing entirely in OA's head. The idea of these extreme opposites existing in the same dimension take heavy inspiration from the esoteric ideas of Madame Blavatsky, such as in her 2-part series, The Secret Doctrine. In these books, the famous 1800 psychic claims to have been given access to an ancient Tibetan document that chronicles the creation of the universe and the history of humans, with the document supposedly being the first account that inspired all of the ancient religions of the world. Most believe the Tibetan document to be a fabrication, and Blavatsky instead uses it to point out the many parallels that do actually exist throughout the world's ancient myths, reconciling them with the speculative sci-fi of her time and drawing heavy inspiration from the previous esoteric movements in history. This document relies heavily on the 7 days of creation myth found in many cultures, most notably the opening chapters of the Book of Genesis. Blavatsky describes these 7 days as being representative of 7 phases of existence, with us only being in the 4th phase of existence right now. These phases are represented by 7 lights in our sky, ranging from the first light, the sun, to the 7th light, Saturn. The sun to many cultures has represented a god who is the very beginning, thus why Sunday is the beginning of the week. Saturn represents the 7th phase, the 7th day of the week, Saturday, the Sabbath, where God takes a great rest, which was later moved to Sunday when Christianity spread to the West. This great rest Blavatsky claims to represent the entire week in a way, connecting the end of the week to the beginning, with Saturn, the darkest at the end of the chain, suddenly becoming the brightest as the cycle starts again as the sun. This is a concept attested to in some ancient Canaanite cultures surrounding the early Israelites. These darkest and lightest points exist as opposite ends of a chain, but loop directly into each other, with dark becoming light and light becoming dark just based on where your perspective is. The way the darkest and brightest versions of Hap and OA exist in Dimension 1, yet simultaneously are contradicted by the opposite versions in OA's head. OA thinks she is the purest version of herself, and is being the worst version of herself because of it. And that is the story of the OA, an endless loop about a woman who has the power to affect higher dimensions, which in turn can affect Dimension 1, sending everyone onto a crazy journey to make her friends real, each season giving us new lore to help us better understand how she did it when she first jumped from Dimension 1 to Dimension 2. The Gnostic tale of Sophia is just one of the many mythological inspirations to the show, and I plan to do another video about all of those many inspirations soon. So hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time.